Welcome to Mandibil and to my part 16 of my deconstruction of Stefan Molyneux's book, Essential Philosophy. Last time we were dealing with, let's see if I can get an overview of how far I went last time. We were talking about, hang on, second. Seems to be something missing, a headline here somewhere. I'm missing a headline. Maybe it's just me. Okay. Sorry for this little. I have to get orientation in the text here. I thought I had it nailed, but apparently I'm having a hard time figuring out exactly how far I got last time. Causality and determinism, I think we went over that. I thought there was a chapter right here somewhere. Throwing rocks. No, I think actually I went quite far the last time. God and arguments. I think I headlined it argument and uniqueness. So I think there was nothing too big to I got around my own sort of low down and dirty argumentation around the idea of free will and determinism. And I might want to add to determinism that determinism is actually not based on empiricism, right? You could say that the idea of reality is based on empiricism, on your experience, right? You create your reality as a larger, it's an attempt at establishing an abstract, complete picture of what might be out there, but you still only have that window into a certain angle, let's say, of your apparent scope of that reality, but you can move yourself to a complete different place in that reality or that external world you do not have access to, and create another part of that reality. If you go to like the North Pole, I'm assuming there is a North Pole, well, then you will add to that reality. But the reality is your reality. I think where materialists / physicalists go wrong is that they think that reality they are establishing is an approach at an object, is actually the objective reality out there, but it's still something that is inside you, an established reality that is yours, that you can objectify and agree with other people on. You can't sort of propose about the direct experience, but you agree about to some extent, about the certain aspects of it from your objectification, let's say, right? Like we agree upon the shape of Earth or something like that. It has become an agreed upon story, and that's why someone like Copernicus was sort of attacked for not going along with the already established story. This is how it is. Why are you right? So in many ways, human beings are storytellers more than they are objectifiers, you could say, right? But what I'm trying to say is that there's a thought experiment in science, I believe it's called Laplace's demon, which is like if there was, it's not exactly the same demon as Descartes, I don't think, right? But it's some consciousness could be aware of all particles in the universe. They could predict everything, right? but my point is that no individual human being has never had a complete reality, so to say, right? So if you only have a little subset of reality, and comparing to this potentially universe size reality, right? Then claiming that everything is going on according to a certain law and it's just things bouncing around is like you are extending your theories maybe a bit too far to say that you can almost like eliminate consciousness as a part of that, or downgrade consciousness to something that is just along for the ride, so to say, right, in determinism. And from an idealist point of view, it gets even worse, because that reality everybody is referring to is their own reality. It's their particular individual reality. There's no one who has the big reality and comes around to people and say, here's the big unchanging reality which has your reality has to conform to. No, it's everybody has their own version of quote reality, I suppose, and I can only establish that axiomatically. So in other words, determinism is based on a very loose foundation, right? It's at least as loose as the argumentation for free will, right? I would say it's even looser, because I'm actually personally having some kind of notion, I wouldn't say experience, but a notion of will, right? I can't point to it. It's not something that I experience, but it's like I am deciding things, right? I am making possibility. I'm creating possibilities, and I seem to be acting accordingly. So there is a notion of free will. I don't have a notion of the laws of the universe. Those are mental abstractions, right? They are sort of mental gymnastics. But I'm not doing mental gymnastics in order to figure out, oh, I might have free will, right? I'm in it as I do it, so to say, right? So I would say free will is actually closer to good philosophy than determinism is from this experiential standpoint. Okay. Arguments and uniqueness. Ask yourself this: can you imagine debating with any known entity other than a human being? I don't debate with the television because the television has no free will. These are all sort of evidential. They are not proofs of anything, right? You can't get to a proof of free will or a disproof of determinism, right? It just can't be done. I mean, there's no way to other than having the notion in yourself about free will, but you can't point to other people and say, you have free will because I have it, right? That's the problem of other minds. So you can't point to free will. You can only say, well, I seem to have free will. But that's not really a good philosophical argument, other than, let's say, it can make people philosophize for themselves and maybe get to their own conclusion about these things. They might, people have been sensitized and desensitized to certain kinds of thinking during culture and upbringing and brainwashing and so on. So they might distrust certain kinds of thinking, a certain kind of emotions and whatever, right? So they might be sort of provoked into thinking along certain lines, and that might help them get to the idea that free will actually might be the best explanation, right? Rather than determinism. So, where was I going with this? I'm not even sure. I forgot. Okay, let's head on. I understand when the behavior of it was about this. You can't. There's no, wipe away everything kind of proof, right? So you can't get to a proof of this. It can only be, it points in the direction of this, or it points in the direction of that, and that's all that we can work with, right? I do not debate with clouds, watches, robots, or heating ducts. I only debate human beings and only some human. There's a little problem with this kind of indirect proof, right? Or indirect argumentation. If nobody had ever argued, would that mean you can't prove that there's free will? So he's basing the existence on something based on a certain kind of behavior over here, right? So somebody's arguing, you're saying, aha, so therefore there must be free will. But if nobody argued, would there not be free will then? Or would you have a harder time proving free will? Well, then it's kind of, it seems like a fallacious way of arguing, because you're not referring to that thing you want to prove. You're kind of making a dichotomy and looking at the other thing and saying, well, there's this thing over here that doesn't work. So therefore, indirectly, the other half of the dichotomy must be correct. So it's kind of slightly sophist trick, this, right? Because I deal with human beings as the only entities I can debate with, I cannot then put them in the same category of every other conceivable entity that I will not debate with. If I consider it sane to debate with human beings, then it would be insane for me to treat these two entities as the same. It is hard to think of any categories as singular and positional as the difference between entities you are willing to debate with and entities you would be insane to pretend to debate with, right? Try and think of a category that small and that oppositional to everything not in the category. It is virtually impossible. Determinism and uncertainty. You do not have to be able to explain a phenomenon in order to accept it. You also do not have to be able to explain a phenomenon in order to reject irrational pretend explanation of it. I do not have to be able to explain the origins of the universe in order to accept that the universe exists. I do not know the incontrovertible facts about the origins of the universe, but I reject that it was created by a giant space turtle, that it was both created and destroyed simultaneously, or that it expanded and contracted at the same time, and so on. There are these contradiction arguments again, right? A baseball pitcher does not need to know the detailed equation of air resistance to able to throw a ball, nor to understand that he cannot throw a ball in opposite directions at the same time. Determinists will often demand that those who accept free will provide an incontrovertible explanation of the origin and process of free will. This is silly. It's a silly form of intellectual baiting, similar to theists who demand that atheists provide an incontrovertible explanation of the origin and process of the universe, or supply the details of every conceivable stage of evolution. I cannot explain free will. I cannot describe and provide incontrovertible explanation of its origins and processes. But so what? Before Darwin, no one had any idea how complex life came about. Does that mean that they had no right to believe in horses or people, or the value of selective breeding? Because I cannot accurately describe the development and evolution of my eyes, does that mean I cannot open them or see? All knowledge is preceded by ignorance. That is the entire point of knowledge. Knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know, but could know, is the entire progress of human thought. Admitting you don't know something is not a confession of impotence, but of possibility. The fact that we don't yet know all the biological underpinnings of free will gives us something to explore, to examine, a goal to pursue. It is not a bad thing, it's a wonderful thing. It is not a failing, it's an opportunity. Demanding that we not accept or believe in he's appealing to emotions here, right? It's sort of emotional appeal. So it's kind of you should be happy that this is the case, right? So it's sort of throwing kind of emotional stuff at you to make you give up your position as determinist, right? So that's not really a great sort of it's so wonderful, right? That doesn't work for me. Demanding that we not accept or believe in something before we can explain everything about it is truly putting the cart before the horse. It's this thing I referred to in an earlier deconstruction somewhere, that when the headlines arrived in 1915 or 1919 or whenever Einstein's general theory of relativity was finally proven by some British guy. It was like, Einstein, the world has changed, and Einstein has changed the world. No, he didn't change anything. He just made the correct, a more correct description of what is going on than Newton did, right? And the other guys talking about the laws of the general laws of the universe, right? So it's like it's not like we couldn't drive a car or fly an airplane before Einstein understood how to describe it. We just do it, right? And that's why I like a delineation between the everyday, direct, objectified stories we tell ourselves about the objects and the abstract, generalized laws of the universe, which are actually not something we use in everyday life. I don't check up on the latest news about gravity in order to go to my car or drive to work or whatever I do, right? Run up a hill or something. I don't check whether or not the laws of gravity has been changed by somebody in the last few hours to make, oh no, then I can't jump here or something like that, right? That's not how I work. That's not how human beings work. The abstractions are useful in certain generalized, larger scope events, like if you're going to send a rocket out of the solar system, you might want to take a look at Einstein and Newton and so on, right? But for my everyday buying an orange or something, I don't need these laws of the universe, so to say, right? I have my own stories about how these things work. And these personal stories, you could say, that might have similarities to other people's stories about the same objects. These are the kind of stories I think that animals have. They have stories about, birds or mice or tigers or trees and so on, right? Fruit. They have stories that they work from, but they don't have laws of the universe, right? So he sort of hints at this, that you can work from your object connected sort of, or situational laws that you work from. When you have an apple, you have a certain apple law within you could say, right? That apples are used for this, apples are used for that. When I'm hungry, I can eat an apple and so on. And you have a different story for oranges. They may have similarities, but a different story for oranges, right? Like peeling. If it's a frying pan, there's a certain story about that frying pan that you have evolved, so to say, or you have added to during your lifetime, right? It has nothing to do with gravity or anything like that, right? So it's like, okay, gravity, if I drop a frying pan, or I drop an apple, or I drop an orange, they are going to behave in quite similar ways. And that's why a guy like Newton said, hey, there's a pattern here, right? But that's not what I am using, how I'm using the objects. I'm not going down to the grocery store checking up on the second law of thermodynamics to figure out whether or not I should buy a frozen ice or not, right? So it's like these abstractions are useful in a broader sense, but in an everyday sense they don't work, right? And these simpler stories or object-related stories, these are the old stories of how human beings work, right? Science is a fairly new thing, where we generalize things rather than objectifying stories, right? And I think that there might be a problem in this, and this is maybe the hurdle or the abstraction level you get to in science, is that which creates a notion maybe that your reality is actually that which is outside yourself, right? But all you have really in your everyday are these stories about objects. Okay. Demanding that we not accept or believe in something before we can explain everything about it is truly putting the cart before the horse. I must believe in a stable phenomenon before I can examine its underlying causes, which is one reason why I'm interested in the physics of objective reality and not in the physics of nightly dreaming. I must believe that something exists before I set aside time to find and examine it. I don't believe in ghosts, so I don't spend any time trying to find and examine them. I don't believe in telepathy, so I don't check out my prowess in the field. I'm not trying to find investors to fund a dragon zoo, either, since that involves fiat currency, which is even less real than fire-breathing lizards. I must believe in some that this is a funny quote, right? Well, yeah, okay, I guess these kind of sarcastic notion, but I find it gives it a less serious image than it needs to have, right? I would, as far as possible, avoid any sarcasm or any kind of funny language, because it may put the reader in, because we're dealing with the deepest level of thinking we can possibly do, right? So we don't want people to get in a sense of this is not too serious, right? I'm not saying it should be self-absorbed or anything like that, but it needs to stay neutral and stringent in a way, right? So you're not kicked out. Okay, that was just a funny. So now you are in a more light-hearted mood, right? And then the next might be very important, so to say, and then you're sort of reading in the same fashion as you just read this sarcastic notion about fiat currency, right? I'm not saying that the notion is incorrect here, but it's just a funny language, right? I have written this book based on the belief that I can achieve truth. Truth? Yeah, but what is that? I can achieve truth. What is that? I experienced this cup, right? This coffee cup. Am I achieving truth? Well, so what would it mean to achieve truth? It's like, it's an indicator. It's a indirect notion that he thinks he can work towards the perfect reality, sort of, right? The perfect knowledge of reality, which is a megalomaniac notion. I'm sorry to say, but, well, I'm actually not sorry to say, but I'm sorry that so many people believe in this cut in marble kind of objective reality out there that they seem to think they have access to, right? And thereby downgrading and almost rejecting their own subjective experience as unimportant compared to this grand, perfect, objective experience, reality, right? That they actually don't have access to. It's just something inside themselves. You are reading it because you believe philosophy has value and are willing to hear original proofs for complex positions. All right. So you're telling me what I'm thinking. I don't like that, right? Demanding that I be able to prove everything about free will before I can accept free will is ridiculous. Yeah, but he just said, hey, you are willing to hear original proof for complex positions. And now he says it's demanding that I'm able to prove everything about free will is ridiculous. So he's sort of self-contradictory there, right? He's saying, yeah, you want proof, right? You want proof? And then he says, yeah, but expecting me to give you proof is ridiculous, right? What is he doing? If ultimate proof were required for any acceptance, then no patient hierarchy of knowledge building would be part. No, you're not building a hierarchy of knowledge. No, that's a wrong. You are believing you are establishing, or you're participating, establishing this insight into perfect reality or something, never changing, perfect, whatever. No, it doesn't work that way. Bad metaphysics once again, right? No one could have any theories on physics before atoms were discovered, and all current theories would be invalid and useless because no unified. No. You're basically just saying, if I want to work from the axiom of free will, I can work from that axiom. Sure you can, but you can't tell other people that they should work from the axiom, right? If they don't want to work from that axiom, fine, let them not work from the axiom. Just stay with the idea that you can then reject to have anything to do with them, right? When you meet people, you say, are you working from free will? And they say no, well, okay, we can't work together then, right? You understand where I'm going? It's like philosophers think that they have to force feed solutions into people. If they don't understand this is correct, then they have to be fucking force fed. And that is actually the problem with something like the state. It's the idea that there's one way to do it, right? There's just one way. Everybody has to do it, and I'm telling everybody what to do. This is stupid, right? It's like people are so smart that they can figure out to do things different ways than other individuals can do it, right? Or have other ideas of what is the right way to do it. Fine, I'm not going to tell anybody how they should see the world, right? I'm saying how I see it, and I want people to find out if they agree with me, or I want to find out if I agree with somebody else, because then I can work with these people with whom I agree about these axioms and definitions, right? And the rest can just sort off, basically, right? Or I can sort off away from them if that's the case, right? However, the stability and predictability of matter and energy, but you don't experience matter and energy. These are concepts. These are stories we tell, right? You don't go down to the grocery stores with buying grocery list or whatever it's called. I need some matter and I need some energy, right? You go down, so, it's like it would be something like Monty Python's parrot sketch, right? Where this guy comes in with that dead parrot. It was like, okay, do you have some matter? Do you have some energy? I need 8 energy and 5 matter. That's not how the everyday works. So you can't use matter and energy as philosophical stuff, because you have to understand philosophy all the way to epistemology to get to an idea of matter and energy. So it's a circular argument to say that I am basing predictability of my philosophy on matter and energy, which I actually have a philosophy in the first case in order to establish. So you're not establishing philosophy here, you are begging the question in a way, right? Okay, so what is free will? The definition of free will is challenging and complicated because it must be something unique to the human mind. Therefore, it cannot be anything as simple as tautological as choice. One unique capability of the human mind is to compare proposed actions to abstract standards. Proposed actions. One unique. Compare proposed actions to abstract standards. A beaver will build a dam, but a beaver does not use a blueprint to design the dam. A bird will fly, but a bird does not plot out a flight course on a map ahead of time. Well, I'm not sure then how they work. Do they work from magnetism or something like that? I believe that's how they navigate. Okay, so they do plot out a course, sort of say, more or less, right? Okay, never mind. One defining aspect of human consciousness is our capacity for morality, which is basically comparing proposed actions to ideal standards. When we think of the big 4 evil actions, the big 4? What is that? The big 4? It's like it's something that it is in quotes here. It's like it's something that is already established that everybody knows about, the big 4, right? Big 4 evil actions. I'm going to make a search. There's a reference to big 4 accounting firms. Maybe another search engine here. A Big Four is the titular main antagonistic faction of Agatha Christie's, so it's something in an Agatha Christie book. Betrayed by the Big Four, whistleblower speaks out in financial in accounting firms. The Big Four is a Agatha Christie novel. Big Four firms, accounting, the Big Four, snakes in India, curious past, the Big Four, Megadeth and Anthrax, Am I Evil, is sort of heavy metal bands. So I don't see anything in philosophy about the Big Four, right? So this is kind of a sophist trick, in my opinion, right? But how far did I get? The Big Four. When you think of the Big Four evil action, it's like, the Big Four, right? The Big Four, he's presenting it as something everybody knows. But there's no reference anywhere to anything called the Big Four, right? It's something he has conjured up. I'm not saying it's necessarily not the Big Four, but he is referencing as if it's something you should understand. And this is sort of a grooming tactic, or a manipulative tactic, a sophist tactic, right? He's sort of manipulating to believe that he's talking from a generalized authority of understanding of the Big Four, which is just something he's conjured up, right? Theft, rape, assault, and murder. Moral responsibility requires that we have the capacity to compare proposed actions to abstract standards. If we want to steal something, we can compare our action to a standard so that stealing is wrong. No, you can't, because you can't. Okay, now we're going into ethics, right? So, because he understands that he needs free will in order to talk about ethics, otherwise he is self-detonating the idea of ethics, which has you must be able to act according to a certain standard, right? That's what he's or a moral principle, you can say, right? And if you can't act in a certain way, or avoid acting a certain way because there's determinism or there's no free will, then you can't. It doesn't make any sense to make something saying you should act this or you should act that way, right? If you can't control your own actions, and that you need free will for that, right? So he knows where he has to go. So he's trying to connect the dots now, right? He's trying to connect the dots. So just be aware, right? Stealing is wrong. Well, how would I compare an action to stealing is wrong? How would I know the wrongness, right? So stealing is wrong, yes. Stealing is a wrong way of acquiring stuff. So a wrong way of acquiring stuff is a tautology. It just points out a part of the definition. It doesn't point out how that acquiring of stuff becomes wrong. Right? That's Hume's Izzard gap, that he can't jump the way he does, right? So it's another example of how little self-criticism he has towards his own ability to argue from A to B to C and so on, right? He's more in the camp of I'm connecting the dots, and I'm using whatever argument I need in order to connect the dots, instead of working from the ground up and eliminating stuff on the way that can't be done. And even if I don't want them to be disconnected from my philosophy, I have to accept it, because that's where my philosophy leads me, right? Okay. Please understand that this is not a proof of morality, which will come later in this book, but an example of commonly accepted moral reasoning. Free will does not mean that we can do anything we want. That would be omnipotence. We are not free to fly unaided or jump to Mars, but it does not mean that we have capacity to compare our proposed action to abstract standards, ideal standards generally. So who's going to give you ideal standards? What is an ideal? It's all composed of individual, subjective individuals, right? Yeah, that's bad formulated. There are only subjective individuals. Nobody can present an ideal standard from their subjective point of view, right? They're all subjective. There's nobody who has, okay, but I have the ideal standard. I'm coming down from the mountain with the ideal standards, right? It's always some kind of story. Yeah, I went to God and he gave the ideal standards and so on. Well, that's the problem, right? That's what potentially Nietzsche says leads to nihilism, that there are no ideal standards, right? It has to be agreed upon somehow. Some of these ideal standards are pure abstraction, Platonic almost. Ooh, Platonic. Such as a universal respect for persons and property. Others are more personal, reciprocal, and empathetic. How would you like it if someone stole from you? Children who don't want to eat their dinner are sometimes informed of the existence of starving children in the third world. Challenges, sometimes referred to as first world problems, are generally marked as being silly and unimportant relative to the survival challenges of living in a poverty-stricken landscape. We may refrain from stealing because we accept that stealing is universally wrong, or we may refrain from stealing because we empathize with the upset and anger that our potential victim would doubtless experience, or because we are afraid that we are going to be put in jail by those who rule over us, right? We also may refrain from stealing because we fear punishment by an all-knowing and all-seeing God, but such an effect cause and effect has little place in a book on philosophy. I refer you to my number of theological works for more information on this perspective. What? No, not. I refer to any number of. No, he didn't say my theological word. I misread. So okay. I used to be a priest. The comparison of potential actions to abstract rule falls in the category of direct moralizing. The comparison of such actions to negative emotion falls. He's just walking around using evidential funny language and words and words and words and words and words, instead of saying you can't get to free will. You have to axiomatically establish it, right? And it doesn't matter. You don't have to define it, right? So if you don't have to prove that it exists, as you said earlier in the text here, why are you trying to define it then, right? Just say, I'm working from this standpoint. If you don't agree, fine. Then we disagree, right? There should be room for disagreement. In the first case, the principle is that stealing is wrong. In the second, it is the action that caused negative emotions are wrong. Stealing just happens to be one of those. I fully understand that the phrase stealing is wrong is not satisfying philosophically, and I will strive to satisfy you philosophically later in the book. I also understand that it's supposed. So he's bringing in morality at a place where it has nothing to do, right? Morality has nothing to do, or moral statements have nothing to do here in free will, right? He shouldn't bring it in. It's sort of a circular argument. Okay, it's important for morality, so I'm bringing in morality, trying to mix it up. So right, I created something. Right. It's like no. One thing at one step at a time. Right. You don't bring something in and say, well, it's not really important because I have to prove it later, something like that, right? Then don't bring it in, right? Because it reeks of bad argument. However, we certainly must accept that human beings have the capacity to develop universal abstractions that have a positive. You know that you have the ability, right? But that's the problem of other minds. You have to refer to your own experience only, right? You can't tell me what I experienced. Don't tell me what I experienced, right? Please. If you want to learn truth about the physical world, you need to use the scientific method. If you want to build a bridge that stands up efficiently, you need to use the principle of engineering. If you want to sell medicine, basically, his writing is so cumbersome, right? In particular, the double-blind experience, to stave off the double-blind experience. Yeah, okay. Experiment. Yeah, I guess. Yeah. You have to. Yeah. Okay. Let's go with that. Of the inevitable possibility of mistaking the placebo effect and other false positives for an imaginary cure. Given that we have the capacity to develop universal abstractions, positive obligations, abstractions that we need to use to objectively achieve a particular end, we must also accept that we have the capacity to compare our proposed actions to those universal abstractions. I don't buy into universal abstractions, right? I have my abstractions. And since I only have access to my own mind, therefore only my own abstractions, I can't talk about universal abstractions, right? That's why I don't like the laws of nature or Hume's law and so on. It's like, this is how it is and shut the fuck up and obey, right? I don't like that notion. These universal abstractions, yeah, you could agree with somebody else on it, but that doesn't mean somebody has to fucking agree with you because you call it universal, right? So it's like, this is the authoritarian part of Stefan Molyneux' philosophy. He doesn't leave room for people to disagree with him, right? It should be implicit in philosophy that it's personal. It's my philosophy. I'm working from my experience, right? So you can't say these universal abstractions that everybody must have, and if you don't have them, there's something wrong with you, right? That's what I don't like about his philosophy. And that's possibly an artifact of that bad metaphysics, right? When we ask a child to accept that 2 and 2 make 4, we are not asking the child to believe this truth for any particular instance, but rather for all instances of that equation. Yeah, but numbers are pure abstractions, right? There's no one who says you have to follow the sort of convention of numbers. If you don't want to, fine. I'm not going to work with you then, right? Because I'm going to follow the method or the understanding of numbers. If you don't want to, fine. But don't expect me to work with you, right? It's this like, this is the way it is, so you have to obey, right? Sort of notion. It's sort of between the lines, right? And it comes from bad metaphysics. So bad metaphysics will inevitably lead to authoritarianism, in my opinion, right? But rather for all instances of that equation, it's not just that these 2 coconuts and 2 coconuts make 4 coconuts, but rather that 2 and 2 of anything make 4. When we ask a child, it doesn't make 4. It's a sort of, it's an agreement of how to count, right? Okay. When we ask a child to write the number 4 on an answer sheet, we are asking the child to compare his proposed action writing a number with the ideal standard of writing the correct number. Yeah, if the child wants to follow that story, that convention, right? So you're just forcing a child to follow a certain convention, which you have accepted to follow. But why are you forcing the child to follow that? Right? It's always those who, it has, throughout the history, it's always been those who didn't follow the conventions who actually evolved into something better for all of humanity, you could say, right? It was those who didn't follow the rules about, you shouldn't take interest rates for loaning money out. Okay, so we couldn't have an industrial revolution for 1,000 years because Jesus said it's bad to take interest rates on a loan, right? Stupid idiot, right? It's what also say, I don't care what Jesus said. I'm going to take interest rate on loans, and all of a sudden there's an industrial revolution, right? So it's like, and Einstein was sitting in the patent office. Nobody cared for him. He was kind of weird, they thought, right? All those who are following the conventions of, Newton is perfect and so on, right? And Steve Jobs, he would, if he hadn't made Apple, he said he would probably been a criminal. Because nobody could see the things he could see, right? He wanted to do something different from the conventions that everybody else was following, right? So it's all these conventions. And the bad metaphysics you are suffering from inevitably turns out to you having to appeal to these conventions in order to establish that never changing objective reality, which you actually do not have access to, right? You only have your own subjective experience, but you just feel it's not a foundation from which you can argue philosophically, because then it would be, well, it's my opinion that this is how I feel like this. Do you also feel like this, right? So you have to appeal to that universality somewhere in order to get to your philosophy. And it doesn't work. It's just fallacious, right? So the whole foundations of your philosophy is basically fallacious or bad philosophy, right? With regards to criminal guilt, we generally think of punishing a man. Criminal guilt? What's that? Criminal guilt is just bringing in things left and right here in free will. It's like, oh man, please, criminal guilt? Oh, punishing a man, that's another word for torture, right? A man because he knew what he was doing at the time was wrong. That's a kind, punishing is a justified torture, right? That's a manipulative word. Oh, no, it's not torture, it's punishment. Because I'm in the right to do this torture to you because you did this, did the other thing, right? If a man is insane, has a brain disease, or is mentally retarded to the point that he does not have the capacity to know the immorality of his actions, then we may decide to confine him, not as a moral punishment, but rather just to keep everyone else safe. We may decide to put down a dog that keeps biting people, not as a moral punishment, and certainly not as a kind of ethical instruction to other dogs, but rather just to keep people from being bitten. Thus we do not judge a man morally if we decide. No, don't tell me how I judge things. It's like, right? It's that's freaking annoying, right? This is again, an artifact of that bad metaphysics. He has to tell everybody how they see the world and what they experience, and the big four, and don't lecture me on how I experience things, right? Get away with that, right? Please. We do not judge a man morally if we decide that he is unable to morally judge his own action. In other words, if he is unable to compare his contemplated actions to any ideal moral standard, then we do not judge him to be in possession of free will. We do not expect a rabid dog to... I'm kind of lost now where we are in arguing for free will, right? I'm lost in all these words, right? All these words and examples and whatever, left and right, and it's just too much. My train of thought that sort of should keep me engaged in his arguments is being derailed somehow, right? So I have to sort of pull myself together. So no, stay on track, stay focused, Luke, right? A raccoon that steals our food is not dragged off to court and tried as thief. If we do not have the capacity to compare our own potential acts to some idealist standard, then we can never be held responsible. But that's not a proof of anything. That's not a definition of anything. Well, it's like, I need free will, otherwise I can't moralize. So because I need free will, there must be free will. No. Connecting the dots, obviously connecting the dots in the way you want, right? So a gender-driven philosophy. Imagine that a thief steals a wallet and then, what's a thief? Is that an alien of some kind? So you're already, that's a thief over there. You see, that's a thief, and that thief is going to steal a wallet now, right? That's not how it works. So you're just labeling individuals this way, that's a thief, and that's a this, and that's that, and right? No. So if I'm not stealing anything at the moment, right? Let's say it could be established whether or not I'm stealing, right? I would say the only one who knows whether or not I'm stealing is me. Whether or not I'm stealing or whether or not I'm being stolen from, right? I'm the only one who can judge that. You might have your ideas of that same, but that's from your standpoint, right? So I can't point to you and say, you're a thief, right? Unless I have some kind of understanding with that person that I'm potentially calling a thief, or he is calling me a thief, right? So there has to be some agreement beforehand before we can say whether something is stealing or not, right? It's just the problem of Hume's insult gap. The thief cries out in frustration at the violation of his property rights. We can clearly see the hypocrisy here. The thief violates the original victim's property rights. Oh, what's the property rights? Is that something we are discussing in free will? Come on! Can we imagine applying this judgment of hypocrisy to another animal in the world? If a squirrel steals a nut from another squirrel and in turn is stolen from, would we call the first squirrel a hypocrite for chasing the second thief? Of course not. Because we recognize that the squirrel does not have the capacity to compare a potential theft to a concept of universal property rights. Yeah, but you haven't established property rights, so you can't use it in an argument now, right? You're just pulling in stuff left and right that isn't possible to use as an argument because you haven't reached that point in your philosophy yet, right? I mean, it's like it's very, very badly argued. This it's just circumstantial in a way, right? And you just I'm trying to bring in a dot here and a dot there, and maybe I can connect the dots this way, and it looks like I've done something, right? I don't buy this at all, right? We were all asked when we were children, if we hit another child, how would you like it if another child hit you? The endless repetition of this empathy programming, along with other factors, helped us develop a sense of responsibility for the feelings of others as we grew up. The golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, is a reflection of this basic understanding. As human adults, we are generally expected to recognize that other human beings have feelings and preferences, just as we do, which needs to be taken into account when considering potential actions. Another mantra we hear as children is you should... Are we in a discussion of free will here? I mean, I can follow the lines here, right? I can connect the dots, right? That's just a swarm of weird dots. You should have known better. In this context, better means having higher standards of behavior. When you were a child, you doubtless attempted to avoid punishment for bad behavior by saying that your friends told you to do something, at which point adults doubtless asked whether you would jump off the Brooklyn Bridge or Toronto CN Tower if your friends told you to do that as well. Of course you wouldn't, which means that you had the capacity to judge the value of your friends' suggestions. You were increasingly required to use your own judgment rather than blame your friends. Well, stay with that. Stay with that. Use your own judgment, right? Stay with that. The entire purpose of civilizing children is to get them to compare their proposed actions to ideal standards. In a philosophical society, this means reason and evidence. Really? This means reason and evidence. What? An ideal standard is a moral principle, right? That's the principle to rule all other principles, right? Or methods or agreements or anything. The moral principle is above everything else, right? Because what could possibly be more important than a moral principle, right? So that's it. It's a moral principle. That kind of abstract standard he's talking about is, what's it called? Ideal standard. An ideal is some kind of morality, right? So so in a philosophical society, I don't know what a philosophical. I don't understand what a society is. Society is a concept or an abstraction of some kind, right? Reason and evidence. Reasoning is when I try to figure out if I stick a long stick towards an apple high up in an apple tree, the apple might fall down so I can eat it. That's a kind of reasoning. Then this follows this, that follows this, and this happens, and then I can do this, right? That's reasoning. Why does that mean reasoning? Do you need reason and evidence in order to get to that ideal standard, right? Well, evidence is when if I'm trying to figure out where that apple tree is that I'm going to poke at, right? I'm going to, I need to go down that pathway, and when I get to that tree, I need to go to the right, and then walk like 50 steps, and then to the left 30 steps, and there the tree will be. That's the evidence. I need to find that path. I need to find that tree that where I make a right turn, and then I need to count whatever it is to get to that, and then I'll be there, right? That's the sort of evidence towards the object I'm going for. But it's the object I'm going to interact with, and the objects along the way I'm interacting with serves as evidence towards my object. That's what I'm interacting with, right? So it's the objects that are important to deal with along your experience, right? So it's just too fluffy argument. These are two big terms: reason and evidence. Okay, then you have said everything. Well, you actually didn't say anything. It's like saying, well, do you know where the nearest gas station is? Yes, it's in the universe. Okay, thank you, right? The entire purpose of civilizing children is to get them to compare their proposed actions to ideal standards. In a philosophical... Okay, I have done that already. In Christian society, the ideal standard is the 10 Commandments, combined with what would Jesus do? Who gives a shit what these people want? Why are you bringing that in as opposition to philosophy? Is it because you actually want to cuddle up to Christians, right? They have to feel welcome. I'm not an atheist anymore. I don't like because they have money, right? And I need to rally them to get the orange man back into place, right? Morality itself is the comparison of proposed action to ideal standards. Criminal judgment is the comparison of past actions to ideal standards. In other words, criminal judgment occurs when there has been a failure in moral judgment, which manifests in illegal action. A baby who urinates on you has no capacity to compare urination options to ideal standards. The average teenager, oh man, he goes around example after example after example. It's like, okay, I'm going to throw 12 examples at you, and then you give up, right? Right? When we think of a speeder on a highway, we condemn that person. We assume the driver has the capacity to compare his current speed with the ideal standard, the speed limit. Why is that an ideal standard? How do you know that it's ideal? Right? How do you know? Hume sees the gap, right? And has chosen to exceed it. If the speeder turns out to be drunk, we recognize that he's making decisions with diminished capacity. But this does not, of course, let him off the hook. The ideal standard in this situation is not make good decisions while you drive drunk, but rather do not drive while you are drunk. It is a simple fact that people make poor decisions when drunk, not to mention having slower reaction times. Every driver knows this, so he is responsible for the decision of getting drunk and then driving, not for making bad decisions while driving drunk. If a man ties a blindfold over his eyes while he is driving, we do not blame him for hitting a garden gnome, since he cannot see. Instead, we blame him for tying the blindfold over his eyes. The ideal standard here is not don't hit garden gnomes, but rather do not drive if you cannot see. Similarly, if a driver hit a garden gnome because his brakes failed and it turns out he had not maintained his brakes, we blame him not because his brakes failed, but because he chose to avoid necessary maintenance. On the other hand, if his car was well maintained, but someone sabotaged his brakes, then of course the person who tinkered with his car is to blame. This can get quite complicated if you set events in motion that produce a particular outcome. Even if you did not anticipate and do not want that outcome, you can still be responsible. A fascinating example arises. Oh, is this a discussion of free will? I mean, come on, man. Right, I need to highlight this to get back to it. What is free will? This is the... It's kind of incredible. He's not really talking about free will. He's talking about anything but free will, right? This is really, really annoying, right? It's sort of off-putting in so many ways. It's like, come on, man, get to the freaking point. Don't throw words at me until I sort of give up and give in and saying, okay, I guess I don't understand this high-flying philosophy. I'm so stupid or something like that. Don't fall for that trap, right? Wherein if a robber runs into a store, what's a robber? As if you can identify, oh, hey, look, that's a robber. How do you know it's a robber, right? You're just labeling the world in a sort of attempt at objectifying the idea of robber. But it's only when somebody actually robs something that they can be considered a robber. As when they're no longer robbing things, right? Then they're not, it's not, it's this attempt at generalizing certain behaviors into something that is if somebody has stolen something, they are labeled as thief, right? Because somebody judged it wasn't the ideal standard of acquiring stuff, so therefore I'm labeling you thief, and you can't run away from that label. This is sort of obnoxiously badly argued kind of approach at objectivity. You can't observe robber, right? It's stupid. It's like you can point out, oh, that there's immoral people over there. You are actually behaving like you're an authority about people pointing out there's a robber and there's a rapist and there's a whatever, right? It doesn't work that way. It simply doesn't work that way, right? And the cashier shoots at him to prevent the robbery. Well, how does he know it's a robbery? You can't shoot him before he's robbed anything, right? So otherwise you can always go around and say, that's a robber, I'm going to shoot. Oh, there's another robber. Oh, somebody I don't like. Okay, you're a robber, now I can shoot you, right? How does this work? I mean, you haven't even got to ethics yet, right? And now you're talking about shooting people, right? Holy fuck, man, right? Don't take this philosophy serious. It is dangerous, right? It's so badly argued, and he's just during free will he's talking about shooting people, right? It's dangerous. Kills another customer. It is the robber who is charged with murder, not the cashier. The robber set the events in motion that resulted in the death of the customer, although the robber doubtless did not want the customer to die. In this case, the ideal standard is don't rob. One reason being that highly random and uncertain events may be set in motion. Another example. No. Freaking don't give me another example. I'm not stupid. Okay, so no matter where we look in the realm of ethics or free will, but you can't lump free will and ethics together in this way. We understand that there is a real ideal behavior, and someone who has knowledge of that behavior can choose to behave in non-conforming ways. If I go to a foreign country where I do not understand the customs, I can be forgiven for acting in ways that may otherwise be considered offensive, because I'm not aware of the ideal standards, and therefore I'm not consciously deviating from them. If I fail to study for a test, I'm deviating from an ideal standard. But what is it that makes it ideal? You're referring to something that you haven't justified, right? You haven't explained philosophically what is an ideal standard. Well, that should be a moral principle. But you haven't dealt with ethics yet, so you can't refer to an ideal standard before you have philosophized about it, right? This kind of moving back and forth in sort of preconceived ideas of what might be ahead in philosophy, but that's a circular way of arguing. You can't use that which is ahead of you, which needs that which you're dealing with now to be established before you can get to it and use it, right? So you can't bring it in as if everything is already established in your head, and then you just have to bring in certain stuff as you see fit. It doesn't work this way. This is so badly argued philosophy, right? Sometimes the ideal standard is more relative, like the Aristotelian mean. What's the Aristotelian mean? It's like, okay, everybody knows what the Aristotelian mean is, right? So, excuse me. Where the ideal standard is an absolute, there we generally find morality. Okay. You can't find morality. You know, oh, look, there's some morality over there. Have you seen that one? It's green. Morality. No. Where the ideal standard is relative, there we generally find aesthetics, culture, politeness, and other forms of social standard enforced by discipline. Why are you all? It's like you're doing ethics now, right? You're not doing free will. What the hell are you doing? Oh, damn. Okay, I'm going to. Yes, you can shoot someone who's attacking you. Okay, how do I know they are attacking? What's the definition of attacking? So now you're talking about you can shoot people in free. It's so ugly, this. I can't believe how bad this is, right? You can shoot someone who's attacking you. Okay, so you're the one figuring out whether or not they're attacking. So if you think they're attacking, you just shoot them, right? Oh, and you haven't even dealt with ethics yet, right? I know you have written a book about ethics before this one, but within this essential philosophy, you have to argue stepwise so you get from one point to another in a first principle manner. You can't just within free will talk about shooting people. Oh man, this is bad. This is so freaking bad, right? There are entities that conform to ideal standards, but which do not have a choice. Computers fall into this category. I can program a robot to kill people, Terminator style, and that robot will conform to the ideal standards of my programming. But it has no choice. I could throw a random algorithm in the air so that 10% of the time the killer robot will show mercy and let its victim live, but we would not assume I had given the robot any free will. Randomness is not the same as choice. If we understand this definition of free will, what definition? What definition? If you understand this definition of free will, what is the definition? You just spent, 5 pages throwing words at me. What definition? Okay, so the definition is here. Our human capacity to compare proposed actions to ideal standards. Then the debate between determinism and choice becomes much easier to resolve. Yeah, but the ideal standards, but then there's more than one. So how many are there? Give me an example of these ideal standards. What are those? Right? Are you going to say, well, there's a scientific method and there's objectivity? No. I can't use that if I'm standing there figuring out whether or not I should buy that bicycle or not, right? What's the ideal standard for me to buy or not buy that bicycle? Right? Well, what's the ideal standard? It's so fluffy, this. It's completely useless, right? With this definition in hand, we can clearly see that when a determinist tries to argue you out of your free will position, this determinist is asking you to compare your position that free will is true to an ideal standard called determinism is true. But no, free will can't be true. It's not a proposition, right? It's not a proposition, so it can't be true. And saying that you're just calling determinism is true an ideal standard, you're controlling the vocabulary, and then you are using that vocabulary to create sort of a straw man of some kind, right? And then you're pulling that down and say, I proved it. It doesn't work, right? It doesn't work. However, by asking the support of free will to compare, I'm getting sick and tired of this argumentation here, right? Such a man accepts free will to compare proposed, I realized that I may be seen to have switched the definition a little bit from comparing his proposed action to an ideal standard to comparing the contents of his mind to an ideal standard. But the two are really one and the same. The contents of the mind can only be discerned through actions such as speaking or writing. No, you have direct access to your experience. You don't have to say anything or write anything to understand that you experience elephant, right? You just experience elephant. What the hell are you talking about, right? This comparing his proposed actions. Okay, I don't see any rigid kind of or simple and down-to-earth understanding of how to approach the idea of free will, right? He's just throwing words at you and say, oh, so now I proved it, right? No. And he wants to get into that, controlling the narrative with certain words, the big four, for instance, right? Or ideal standards. This is just words, right? He's not referring to anything. Ideal standards is an abstraction. But if I'm experiencing elephant, okay, I'm experiencing elephant. There's a guy over there. Okay, this is the situation. A guy over there, elephant. Okay, what are the ideal standards? Who the hell knows? But I need to interact with that, or even run away. But at some point I can't keep running away, because then I will die. Not because I don't interact with other people. I can't live off of rainwater and grass or something like that. So we have to interact with other people, right? At some point, at least. Okay. The next one will be change your mind, change your behavior. Okay, that sounds interesting. I will keep that for the next part. So please leave a comment and subscribe to my channel to make sure that you get click the bell and so on to make sure that you get the next part in your inbox. And give me a response on what you think about this philosophy. It would be interesting to hear someone else's ideas of whether I'm completely out of my rails in my critique of this book, right? So